Okay, mics are on? Very good. Okay, so we'll get started here. Thanks everyone for coming. So this is JAM session 303, everything you wanted to know about simulators, both BlackBerry 10 and Ripple. Sitting next to me is Ken Wallace. He's our product manager for our WebWorks platform. So he'll be doing the Ripple session. He's also been around. You might have seen him in other WebWorks sessions here yesterday and today. And my name's Matthew Whiteman. I'm the product manager for BlackBerry 10 simulators. We'll just get started here. So what we wanted to do in this session today is do an overview of both BlackBerry 10 simulator and the Ripple emulator. So in the BlackBerry 10 simulator, we'll be looking at a quick overview on some of the features if you're not familiar with what we have in there today. We'll do a quick run through of kind of the getting started using it, and we'll look at gestures that we have built into the simulator, as well as controls and some basic configurations. And then lastly, we'll kind of just quickly look at beyond simulators. So, you know, the times that a simulator wouldn't be enough for your application testing. And then we'll look into the Ripple emulator, where Ken will go over some of the overviews and features, general working with Ripple, with your WebWorks applications, and then looking at what about real data with your application. And then we'll finish off the session with question and answer period, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all of your questions. Okay, so to start, let's look at the BlackBerry 10 simulator, features and overview. And I guess just before, who here in the room has ever used our simulator? Okay, a couple. Now, was that Playbook or BlackBerry 10 or both? So 10? So 10? Okay. So almost half of you. That's good. So for the other half that haven't necessarily used it, quick overview is the BlackBerry 10 simulator allows you to load and test your applications into a simulated environment without the need for a physical device. So it's a virtual machine built for VMware for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Recommended on a system that supports virtualized extensions for best performance. That also supports hardware acceleration, GLS 1, 1.1, and 2.0. So the simulator can be used with all of our tool environments. So that includes our native SDK, Cascades, WebWorks, HTML5, Air, and the Android runtime. So at the end of the day, the simulator really is just another device target. So you can run and debug applications on the simulator as if you had a connected device over USB. You just point it to its IP address when it's booted on your system. So some of the simulator features that we have available in our current BlackBerry 10 versions. So we'll go over gesture swipes, what swipes that we have that mimic the swipes on a real device, plus some extra shortcuts. Being able to rotate the device and simulate tilting and orientation. Simulation of sensors, GPS data, being able to do NFC simulations. You can actually have multiple simulators opened and doing tag emulation between them. Being also to change your battery levels, that sort of stuff. Also, SD card emulation, so you can simulate mounting and unmounting an SD card if your application is going to be storing data there. And so today, just as on the SDKs for the Dev Alpha units, pre-installed applications include BlackBerry Hub, BlackBerry Messenger, the browser, contacts, calendar, and settings. On the newest 10.1 beta simulator for the Dev Alpha C or the Q10 device, all that's true except BlackBerry Hub. That'll be coming in a future update. So speaking of the 10.1 beta, so we have the simulator available for download today. It actually went live yesterday morning. So I've included the link into the presentation to bring you to the homepage to the simulator where you can go and download this. So really what the new features that this simulator allows to do on top of the old one is you're now using a new screen resolution, the 720 by 720. And If you're using the keyboard, you'd have to use your computer keyboard to do text input because there's no virtual keyboard within this one as you would expect for a keyboard device. There's a couple extra features of how to interact with the simulator that I'll go over in just a second. So let's look at getting started in some of the controls. So for gestures, what we've tried to do is have all the same gestures that you would have on the physical device built into the simulator as well. So this includes any sort of paging through your screens, being able to swipe down from the top of the bezel to access your setting and other application menus, being able to minimize your applications to their active frames, being able to display the keyboard. We have a shortcut that's special for the simulator to actually open the virtual keyboard for the Z10 devices. Being able to rotate to landscape, we have a shortcut in there as well that you can actually just rotate it 90 degrees back and forth to quickly check out the orientation. And new for the 10.1 beta, we've included multi-touch support, which I'll go into that in a little bit here. So just quickly going through these, this should be pretty straightforward if you've used the new BlackBerry 10 devices. But so paging between screens, just swiping left and right. And this is how you get into multiple application screens from being able to pan into the BlackBerry Hub. Swiping down from the top will open up your settings menu, or if you're within an application and you have a specific application menu that you can call up from the top of the screen, you can just swipe down with your mouse. And then also minimizing application to either peek into notifications or to minimize the application to inactive frames. So you just swipe up from the bottom using the simulator. So if you want to bring up the virtual keyboard for the Z10 simulator, just click the bottom left corner and you'll see the keyboard. And if you click that corner again, it'll disappear. This doesn't work on the new 10.1 simulator because there is no keyboard or virtual keyboard that you'll see displayed. So being able to quickly rotate your simulator, if you click the right corner of a screen that has the ability to rotate, so it's intelligent enough to know if your application that's being viewed has a rotation on it. And if you do that, you'll actually see the simulator window resize to a landscape or portrait view. So it's quickly, if you're designing an application that has both landscape and portrait views, it's a quick way of switching between them. And then new in the 10.1 beta for the multi-touch. So this is kind of a neat feature that we've added. It gives you the ability to set up to 10 individual paths for multi-touch. And so if you use your right mouse button, you can actually create all your paths. And when you click on it with your left mouse button, it'll play them back at the same rate that you drew each of them. So this is good for pinch and zoom, perhaps testing in certain game applications. We are going to expand upon this in later releases to allow you to draw out multi-touch things and then save it as an action that you want to repeat in the future. So instead of having to do pinch to zoom every time, you'd be able to make that as a shortcut to replay on your application. So that helps for some testing and automation. So that's a quick overview of some of the gestures we have. And what I wanted to do is jump into using the controller application. So everyone in the audience that has used the simulator, has anyone used the controller application or knows of the controller application? Hands up. So not many. So that's not a good thing. We got to change that today. So the controller application is a really good extension to add additional functionality to your simulator for testing, depending on what your application's looking to do. So it is found in the same installation directory of where your simulator virtual machine is installed. It's in a folder called controller, and it's just an application that launches and sits separately from your simulator. So controller features include being able to drag and drop bar files and media assets into the simulator without actually having to add them to the file system. It gives you device controls, so simulating button presses. Being able to simulate GPS NFC, BBM, as well as I said before, SD cards, so mounting and unmounting an SD card. And the new in the 10.1 beta is being able to simulate phone calls into your application. So even though there's no phone application on the simulator currently, if your application is expecting some sort of interaction with a phone call, you'll be able to simulate calling into the device. So first, looking at the controller application, the first thing you need to do is connect the controller to various simulators running. So you can actually have more than one simulator running on your device, and this is how you go and select which simulator you want to target. So all you have to do from the controller application is go to the connection menu, select the particular simulator and its IP address, and click connect. And that'll get you to the first step, which is now speaking with your simulator. So from here, I'll just quickly go over some of the other features available. So in the drag and drop mode, once it's connected, and I've outlined it, that if you just place any of your bar files just within that region of the controller application, it'll then install it to the simulator. So if you already have a bunch of applications created and you won't have to go into your specific tooling to load them, you can actually just place them into the controller application to get them quickly deployed to your simulator. And the same thing for media files. You can add pictures and movies here if you want some content on your simulator that you might want to use in your application for testing. And then just running through some of all the different features that we have available for the device for testing. These are just high level. If you go to our website, which there's a link at the end of the presentation, you can get the full description details and exactly how to interact with all of the different ones for this. But so going from top down, basically, we have device orientation, so be able to do things like setting the roll, pitch, and yaw, as well as setting rotation. So not just portrait landscape, but if you want to do different degrees in there. Also adjusting proximity and light sensor values if you have an application that wants to interact with that. I said before, changing battery levels. So if you're doing a battery sensing application, you can verify that it's working correctly. We also simulate physical device buttons, so being able to do powering down, a volume, pause and play. One of the neat things with the power button, if you set a password on the simulator and you press the power button, it'll go into the lock screen, and then you swipe up to unlock the device just like you would a physical device. We also have the ability to add a GPS position and new feature as well as route. So you can actually define a GPS route. So if you're developing a GPS application, it'll play back that route to simulate the device actually being out on the road somewhere. A quick question now, but we'll have more questions at the end.
So the GPS position will be through latitude, longitude, or do you provide a map where we can?
Good question, yeah. So right now with the GPS position and route, it's based on lat longitude. We are looking to make that a little bit more interactive in future versions. But yeah, right now it's just based on lat and long. I mentioned the phone one, so being able to simulate a phone call into this simulator. NFC and BBM simulation, so the NFC you can create virtual tags and have multiple simulators, pass that data back and forth, or just have a tag reading into one simulator. The BBM simulation, so included, and I think it was within the last, I think the gold release, there's a BBM server simulation that's included within the simulator as well. So if you're doing an application integrating to BBM, you can actually have a network of a couple simulators registering for BBM, and so sending data back and forth, and you can test how your application would integrate with that. So that can all be done on one machine. And then as well, I had mentioned before the SD card simulation. So those are the basic features that we have for kind of interacting and getting started with the simulator. A couple of the more advanced features that you might be interested in is when we get into configuration. So the first one is being able to resize on your monitor. This was a pretty popular request that we had because with the original Z10 simulators, it was using the actual physical resolution. So on some laptops, you couldn't actually fit it on the entire screen. So now we've introduced ability of zooming it. So with computers that support, or I guess have a decent enough video card, you can scale this simulator to how you see fit. We've now set that to about 70% is the default, which fits on most computers, but you can tweak that up and down, or if you have a large enough monitor, set it for 100%. Additionally, you can connect to the simulator using a Telnet, PuTTY, or FTP. So you can do various commands like setting the zoom on command. Also, when you're connected to the simulator via these ways, username and password is just dev user, and this actually gives you access to logs, so easier troubleshooting for your applications. And then lastly, but not leaving that out there, is improving performance. So within VM, sometimes, depending on your computer's hardware, performance is always an issue because you're basically running an operating system within an operating system. So we always recommend to check to see if your hardware has virtual extensions, or if it's capable. And if it is, please enable them because you'll see a lot better performance. So most modern Intel and AMD processors have this, and something that has to be set into your BIOS.
Quick question. Is there an official documented list of all of these things?
I don't believe there is a full list of commands. I know in our simulator documentation, they do list out some of the most common ones, but I don't. It's a feature I personally haven't used too much, and I don't know if there's, what the full list is. I can take that as feedback to see if they can print something up on our documentation site if they haven't.
Is there something that you can do over connecting like that the controller came on to?
No, not normally. It's mainly just the main idea of providing the connection via FTP is to accessing the logs for the simulator. That's the main use case. But there are, I do believe, and I don't know the command is, you can do other quick commands that the controller application does as well. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is beyond the simulator. So although the simulator it's a great tool, there are some things that just can't be simulated. And then in that case, it's always recommended to have a physical device for hardware testing. So some of these things that you can't simulate are audio and video codecs. There are a very minimal, I think maybe even one or two that the simulator does support, but most of them, there's just no codecs in the simulator. That's normally tied to physical hardware on the devices. So if you see issues of audio and video playing back on the simulator, that's why. Also, just general audio-video playback as well as codecs. There's no video recording via the camera currently. It's something we're looking to add in the future, but that's not there today. Bluetooth, and then cellular and Wi-Fi simulation, it's not there. So if any of these things is something that your application requires and that's what you're building towards, unfortunately, you'll need to use physical hardware as opposed to the simulator as a solution. Okay, so just providing some of the links to where all this information is. So we have our simulator homepage, which is a good stop for the full set of release notes, more information on the controller application, the features, how to use the NFC and BBM server simulation, and then the download link as well for the latest and greatest. Right now we have the current, Dev Alpha or the Z10 simulator, and then we have the beta for the 10.1 keyboard beta as well.
Question. Can we maybe split the Q&A session?
Some
Questions relating to...
Yeah, do you want to do that?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Just repeat the questions?
Yes, yeah, I'll repeat the questions.
Because I have a couple. First one, does the App World or BlackBerry World team use a simulator for app testing, or do they use physical devices?
So the question is whether our App World team uses the simulator or physical devices. I'm not 100%, but I know that there's probably variation of both. I'm not 100%. We'll have to, after this, we can go find someone from the App World team out in the Ask the Experts.
They use the actual device. They have written email to me, one or two, that they were using the actual tab alpha with a particular way for this.
Okay.
That would be interesting to know if they had an integrated system where they automatically have the app installed on the simulator and we can be faster to that person.
Yeah, I don't know, sorry.
Major question, what protocol are you using to communicate with the simulator? So regarding the auto discovery, the controller, the Eclipse plugin, command line.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was what, you said protocol was used to communicate?
TCP/IP, but what application level protocol?
I'm not sure. That we'll have to bring back to one of our simulator developers.
Quick question: would you be able to, now looking at that, if you can feed GPS coordinates in, would you, in theory, be able to script that? So somebody with a mapping application would you be able to script it via the command line, via the telnet interface with the FTP? So you would actually just have a test where you fed the coordinates in, say every 15 seconds or something. Somebody could the simulator then just pick that up on our script.
Yeah. So the question was around being able to have a script to add in GPS coordination during a duration of time. Yeah. So I'm not 100% sure. I've never tried that feature particularly, but I don't see why you couldn't, especially with the routing, because I know with the routing feature you can have multiple lines of coordination or a location.
A very good thing for sort of unit testing and application.
Yeah. Okay, we've just got one up here.
Is there any way to improve the performance of the simulator? Because it's very, very slow on most of the laptops.
Yeah, so with the question was regarding improving performance. So depending on hardware, it is hardware dependent. If you have a system that doesn't enable virtualized extensions, it can be relatively slow, especially depending on your graphics hardware of your computer. There is a mode that when you boot the simulator, you can put into a safe mode, which should run a little faster because it doesn't use the full 3D hardware. But unfortunately, it is somewhat dependent on the actual host OS hardware, so it needs to be a relatively new computer, probably in the last couple of years, for it to run within reasonable performance.
Are there any plans to make it faster, or is it not possible technically?
Unfortunately, it's a constraint of how VMware operates. And because we're not emulating the device, it's a full simulation with the hardware hooks and stuff like that. You do need a decent amount of hardware to get snappy performance.
So it's the real operating system. It's being ported to 386.
Yeah. Question right there.
Yeah, as a follow-up for Rob's question. At the moment, the controller, it's meant to be used by the user, so you need user interaction to change values. But especially for unit testing, it would be extremely helpful if there would be some API where you can actually do it programmatically. So maybe as a wish list item, would it be possible to provide such an API? Then the controller is implemented in Qt, I assume. It already internally has some Qt classes that do the communication with the virtual machine. So maybe ripping off these classes, putting it in a library with a nice API and documentation. This would be really helpful to do automated testing of your application.
Okay, that's good feedback to bring back. Okay. I think it's something that we can look into to see if there is a way to do some of that within the FTP and connection script in the simulator. Then we'll definitely look to document that, and if not, I can take that back for feedback for the team for basically improving how we can do automated testing with some of that functionality.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Last question on the browser.
Can you just hold on and just use the mic? Thanks.
The browser usually renders the pages differently than on the device. Is there a reason for that? So the resolution, the density is different. I mean,
so when you're doing a zoomed functionality, because you're simulating pixels, you're probably seeing a slight difference. If you had it set to 100%, it would probably look more accurate. But
Because it breaks everything when you probably have it below 100%.
yeah, I think it
I
just.
mean, Google is broken when you, or at least in my experience.
Yeah, I haven't seen it particularly,
Okay.
but it's because it's not using the one-to-one pixel mapping.
Okay.
What are your plans to support in-app purchasing, or from live in-app purchasing at least?
On the simulator?
Yeah.
We have App World on the simulator, and I know you can do a sandbox account to test your application that way. I believe that works, but I don't know how live in-app payments would work. I'll have to get them to look at that, because in the simulator you can also enter a BlackBerry ID and register that, but I don't know if it's pointed towards the production App World server or if it's a test App World server.
Okay. And do you have any plans to support BBID logging through the simulator?
BBID is supported today.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can enter in your BBID, and that's how you you set up both App World and BBI or the BBM simulation.
And for apps that also use BBID
Yes.
for authentication?
Yeah, like for games example. Yep.
So you can actually download and run apps from the App World?
Yes, I just don't know if it's the same official catalog. I think it's the test one. Okay, I'll be available after, so if you think of any more questions after the session, we can get you out in the hallway. Okay, so I'll just pass it over to Ken here, and he'll look at Ripple.
Thought you were going to monopolize all my time here. Yeah, okay, perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Ripple Emulator. So this specifically is called an emulator because it's not simulation environment. It's not the full operating system running in there. It's really for web developers who are used to a quick edit refresh cycle of development, and I'll get into a little bit about what we mean with that here. We're going to talk a bit about Ripple, the tool, how it works, where you get it and how you use it, the integration with some of the other command line tools that are provided for BlackBerry development, and the supported platforms. So kind of across our whole WebWorks story, it's very open. It's meant to support the open web, the open frameworks. We're not trying to lock you into BlackBerry necessarily. The web is cross-platform by nature, and people use it for cross-platform development, so we don't want to exclude people from doing this kind of work. First thing that people probably are already aware is that Ripple is open source. You can get it from our GitHub repository. It was brought into BlackBerry through an acquisition about 2 years ago. And it was open sourced at that point in our own repository. But because of, like I just explained, the web being very open, very vendor agnostic in terms of how tooling, how people work is evolving, there's a lot of interest in Ripple from other groups as well. The Tizen people have already forked our Ripple and done some work for Tizen with Ripple. And the Apache Cordova community is using it as well for some of their PhoneGap tooling. And so we want to take that to the next step and be very open about this. So we're actually contributing Ripple to the Apache Foundation as a top-level project. And it will be used much more openly, we hope. I think having it under the BlackBerry GitHub repositories, and that I think just philosophically, some people didn't necessarily want to contribute back to it or be part of the community. We were trying to grow around it when it was part of the BlackBerry community. So we're going to get it into Apache. We're just in the process of signing all the last software grant agreements and things like that. So the incubator project is already set up, so you can take a look at that if you want. But for now, what you can do is you can grab it from our developer.blackberry.com site. And you'll get a CRX file, which is a Chrome extension. So you use it as part of Google Chrome. And that's really key for the kind of experience we were trying to develop with this emulator, in that web developers often like their text editors of whatever kind they use. And we won't get into what the best one is, because everybody has a best one. But they use a text editor or some other ID, whatever they choose, and then they test it in the browser to make sure it's looking and performing the way they want. And it's a very quick cycle of, iteration of getting feedback about what your changes are doing. It's just a quick edit, refresh, see what you're doing. And so we wanted to be able to provide that sort of functionality for a packaged web application that also includes APIs that typical browsers don't have. So WebWorks is, you can think of it as a framework that just extends JavaScript into platform services that are provided by the system. Things like BBM or payment or things like that browsers don't have APIs for, or there aren't standard HTML APIs for them. So your app wouldn't function properly when it gets to execute that code. So we wanted to be able to emulate that kind of information so you can get further into your application testing environment within a browser, so you can maintain that quick edit refresh sort of environment. Of course, it's not the full operating system running here, so it has to be mocked data. So this is why we call it an emulation environment. It's not real simulation. You're not necessarily working with real data or real services from the system, but at least gets you to a certain point, maybe 70, 80% of your development, you can do it quickly this way, and then you'll drop into simulators or hardware to do your final last mile testing. There's an additional services component that comes with the Google Chrome extension that allows you two things, really. It provides a default local web server, so you don't have to necessarily set up your own if you don't have your own web server on your system. So you can just drop your projects into the local web server that comes with Ripple and just point the browser, Google Chrome, at that. It also provides integration into the operating system to run our command line tooling that you use for BlackBerry to package, sign, deploy applications to simulators and devices. So you can do that through Ripple as well. It's actually just an instance of Node.js that we package with Google Chrome, and it just fires up these services and talks with the system through Node.js. So this is really what I was talking about, this quick cycle of edit, refresh, and Ripple just plugs into your Google Chrome instance to provide this emulation environment and APIs. And really what happens underneath the covers, we're going to talk a little bit about what it does. So API emulation provides the mock data for API calls that you're doing in your application. You can also trigger events from the UI of Ripple into the application. So things like battery events or GPS information you can inject into the application and have it respond to those events. It's cross-platform and cross-device, so you'll find that if you target PhoneGap, Apache Cordova platform in Ripple, you can test against an Android device or an iPhone and see how your application will work cross-platform. It has an integrated web inspector, so it's integrated in the fact that Google Chrome has Web Inspector, and you can use it to profile and debug against your application, and I'll get a little bit more detail on that later. It also provides a cross-domain proxy. So by default, browsers shut down cross-domain communication for security reasons, but often inherently, a WebWorks application has a certain amount of cross-domain in it. You're accessing local content within your application and quite often going out to a remote server of some kind to pull in data. So sort of inherently, almost right out of the bat when you're doing a WebWorks app, you've got some sort of cross-domain in it. So we actually have a proxy that allows those things to work within the Google Chrome environment. I already mentioned the local web server and the package sign deploying services that it provides as well. So this is a quick kind of overview of some of the APIs that you can emulate from within Ripple. You can use location data, so that's this screenshot on the far right. You can just put in just kind of static latitude, longitude information. You can specify the accuracy and the altitude, things like that. You can actually simulate a GPS timeout if you get that as well. You can also provide I forgot the format now. I think it says GPX file, which kind of is just a listing of multiple GPS locations, and it will just run through and inject multiple events so that you can emulate sort of a trip of somebody moving through the world and see how your application will react to that. And finally, you've got a map down on the bottom right where you can interact with and select a point that will get put into your application. We also have the ability to emulate accelerometers, so this little highly customized design artifact of a cell phone here. You can click and drag this around and rotate kind of in with your mouse, and it will inject accelerometer events into the application as well. You can also fire in events, like I mentioned before. You can emulate our invocation framework. So I've seen some of you, I think, at my talk on invocation earlier. Invocation is the foundation for integration between applications, bringing cards and being able to use functionality from other applications and systems. And you can simulate your application being invoked by another application if you provide that sort of functionality in your app. Web Inspector is something that you can go a little bit beyond just emulation within this environment. Still not yet moving on to a simulator or device. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with what Web Inspector is. Okay, so a few of you, but not too many. So Web Inspector is a WebKit environment for debugging and profiling web content. Most WebKit implementations have support for Web Inspector, and it's really, if you ever go into Google Chrome on any web page, you right-click somewhere, and usually at the bottom there's an entry that says Inspect Element. If you click on that, you'll get this UI kind of coming into the bottom of the application, and you can do a lot of things in Web Inspector. You can see the DOM tree, you can see all your code. It shows you your CSS styling here on the right. You can actually interact with this, change values, and see how the content will react to it. You can go into resources. It shows you all of the different resources your application pulls in. You can see how long it took to load these resources, how big they were. You can see XHR requests and responses. You can check all the data that comes in. If you go to that Sources tab, you see all of the JavaScript in the application, and you can actually set breakpoints, and you can step through JavaScript with Web Inspector as well. Leave it at that. There's a whole bunch more that Web Inspector can do. One thing to remember is when you do this inside of Ripple, I'm going to step back a screen or two here. Sorry, I didn't have a screenshot of Ripple, but you can kind of see it here. We've got our UI of Ripple on the left and the right, typically, with the controls to emulate application or API calls. And in the middle is a little kind of representation of a device, like a skin around your actual content of your application. This content that your application sits in an iframe inside of the rest of Ripple that's in the browser. So when you actually use Inspector from Google Chrome, it sees everything. So it sees all of the code of Ripple as well. So just something to be aware of is when you use Web Inspector within Ripple itself, you don't want to start debugging Ripple. You want to actually go to the iframe that hosts your application and look at that. Good question. The question was, what is the name of the actual iframe? If you start this Web Inspector by right-clicking on an element that's within your application content, it will immediately default to that particular element of the DOM tree, and then you could step back. I'm not exactly sure what the name of the iframe is.
So viewport container.
Where is it?
The past, before document.
Yeah, that could be, yeah. You can see here there's a script ID here, Tiny Hippo is injected. That's the actual script of Ripple that gets injected at the beginning. So there's a site container. Yeah, it's this section, I think, page container. I'm not sure. So you can look at it and you can figure that out. But at least if you right-click and start it from your application content, you at least get to that point. So Ripple services. So in Google Chrome, once you install Ripple, at the top right, there's a little icon, a little blue icon with some white swirls in it. That's just a regular Google Chrome extension mechanism. You click on that and you say enable the extension at any given time. So Ripple won't get loaded up every time you go into Chrome once you install it. When you're actually debugging your application, click on Ripple and say enable Ripple, and then you'll be emulating on your application. But this is the actual UI that you'll see when you click on that icon. And just simply, if you just want to enable Ripple, just hit enable and go and keep and start debugging. But if you want to use the local web server functionality that I was talking about, or package signing deploy, you want to start Ripple services here as well. And you can also check this box and say auto start services every time Chrome starts, so you don't have to worry about it again. But once you start that up, then you can deploy to a simulator device, sign your application, that sort of thing from Ripple. And this is just an example of when you go to package and sign in Ripple, the UI that you get. right now you have to fill out all this information yourself, the SDK path, the project root, archive name, and such. But once you get this set up, it can go pretty fast.
The problem is that sometimes, like even after using, it gets blank and you have to fill it again.
So the comment was that sometimes after you're been using Ripple, this information goes blank. That usually happens when you switch projects. So we don't currently have a mechanism to even have a concept of a project of what you're currently debugging within Ripple. So it doesn't save save this information per project level. So if you start testing something new or a different project, it won't know what this information is. So we're working on making that a lot more seamless and having project concepts within the tooling. So.
And the bundle number also sometimes creates issues.
Right. Yeah. Working on that too. Yeah. So at this point, we've talked about Ripple and the fact that you're debugging within a Google Chrome extension. It's mocked data. So this is not what you would typically find in the real world. So at some point, you want to figure out, okay, where's the limitations? Where do I end? When do I need to start going into a simulator or a device? Not all of our WebWorks APIs are currently mocked out in Ripple, so depending on which APIs you are, before you ask, I don't actually have a listing of specifically what APIs are or not, but it's a good point of feedback. Thank you very much. We'll work on that. But not all APIs are mocked, so if you get to that point, Ripple won't recognize your application. So you'll need to drop down to a simulator or device at that point. If you want to interact with real data, real interactions, obviously you have to go there as well. As much as we try and do the kind of layout emulation properly, it is still within a Google Chrome environment. Pixels might be slightly off, that kind of thing. So if you really want to get to the point where you know you're pixel perfect with your layout, you want to go to a device. This is something that we're working on to kind of alleviate some of this as well. So this is experimental. If you go to our GitHub repository, you can see if you go through some pull requests and that you'll be able to see some of the history on this. But we're working to add the ability in Ripple to actually proxy all the API calls. Instead of going to our mocked data that Ripple provides, actually go through the USB to the device and have the device process those API calls for Ripple. So you can actually work with real data, real device inputs, and get it that way. It's, like I said, it's still experimental. Right now we already know that the camera API is not fully working yet with this approach. But it should get you that much further to be able to stay within the Ripple environment, do your testing, and get some real feedback from a device before you do your final testing. You'll hear me say that all the time. As much as we want to do tooling and get you debugging in the right environments, at some point you have to go to a real device if you can. It's just, there's nothing that can replace that real device experience. This is just a quick kind of mock out of what that device proxy will look like when you get started in Ripple. And I left this to the end, but this is something that you really need to start leveraging if you haven't already. When you want, especially if you're getting into like built for BlackBerry programs and things where we really start evaluating performance of applications for that kind of thing. Not only can you use Web Inspector within Google Chrome, within Ripple, the WebKit implementation on our device also supports Web Inspector. And you can, from your desktop, if you're connected through USB or on Wi-Fi to a device, you can fire up any WebKit desktop browser and point it at the device. So when you package your WebWorks application, you specify the -D parameter, and it puts it in a debug mode and enables Web Inspector. And when you put the app on the device and load it up, you'll see a dialog come up and say, Web Inspector is enabled. Here's the IP address and the port. And you take that information, throw it into a desktop browser, and it will load up Web Inspector, but it's loading it from the device. So you can use all of the power of Web Inspector for performance and profiling against your application running on the actual hardware instead of within Chrome itself. So this is something you should really take a look at. It can really help you nail down issues with your application and really get performance tweaks for your application.
Quick question.
Yep.
What version of Chrome DevTools are you using?
The version of Chrome DevTools. So our implementation of Web Inspector is our own within our WebKit port. But it's obviously pulled from upstream. I'm not exactly sure which version of WebKit we're currently on.
It's a pretty old UI.
Yeah, I think I just reused a screenshot, but yeah. But the UI is actually pulled, like the way Web Inspector works, all the UI of Web Inspector is pulled from the instance of Web Inspector. So this is actually rendered from data pulled from the device, not from like the Google Chrome instance of Web Inspector. We talked a lot about these already, so we'll skip over this quickly, but Web Inspector has a lot of great stuff that you should be taking a look at. So for more information, you can download Ripple from HTML5/download on developer.blackberry.com. We've got some great documentation there and Ripple release notes. And for now, the open source repo is github.com/blackberry/RippleUI. But as I said, in hopefully a few weeks, our open source project will be under Apache. But the incubator project is already set up, so you can take a look at that. I'm sure you guys have seen this all many times before, but I think the mobile conference guide is getting a little less useful every time you see it. But the session surveys, make sure you fill it out. And thanks for attending. We'll take questions on Ripple now. Yep, you just wait for the microphone, if you don't mind.
For those of us who have to do old-style BlackBerry Java WebKit, WebWorks stuff, does the remote Web Inspector also work for that?
I believe Remote Web Inspector came in BlackBerry 7, I think. I'll have to confirm that, but I think it only was enabled as of BlackBerry 7. Yeah. Might have actually only come in Playbook. I'm not sure it actually works on BBOS. I'll have to confirm that for you after. Sorry. Any other questions? Okay.
So what is the planned update cycle of Ripple? Like, is there any like quarterly or monthly release, or like it's ad hoc?
It's kind of ad hoc at this point, yeah. So, and right now we're kind of being a bit distracted with the move to Apache, so that's why it hasn't been keeping up as much with everything that's coming in the WebWorks SDK itself. But hopefully, with the additional visibility of the project in Apache and additional community participation from Apache Cordova and things like that, hopefully we'll be able to see it evolve more quickly.
And are you thinking of some like down in the future integration with some IDE, or like you are agnostic to IDEs?
That's something we might be able to get into a little bit more in the roadmap session after this. We've got some vision for how we want to evolve WebWorks tooling, yeah, maybe you should come to the roadmap session because I'll be talking a little bit more about where we're going.
It's in which room?
Do you know the room that the roadmap session is in?
I believe it's 105 next door.
We think it's 105. We can check afterwards. But yeah.
Thank you.
Last call for questions. Okay, thanks, guys.